The rain hammered against the windows of Riverside Funeral Home in Portland, Oregon, as mourners gathered around my father's mahogany casket. I stood in the corner, my black dress clinging to my trembling frame, watching the woman who had made my life hell for the past 8 years. Margaret's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the cold calculation in her eyes as she surveyed the crowd of my father's business associates and old friends. The scent of white lilies mixed with her overpowering perfume created a nauseating combination that made my stomach churn. She had insisted on the most expensive arrangements, claiming it was what David would have wanted, but I knew better. This was all about appearances, about maintaining the facade of the grieving widow who had lost her beloved husband at 55. The October wind rattled the old building's foundation, as if nature itself was mourning the loss of a good man. Margaret cleared her throat and stepped forward, her red-painted nails gripping the edge of the casket. The room fell silent, except for the steady drumming of rain against the tall windows that overlooked the Columbia River. Her voice cut through the heavy air like a blade as she announced to everyone present, "I want you all to know that this ungrateful daughter gets nothing from David's estate." The gasps and murmurs from the crowd created a symphony of shock that seemed to please her immensely. I felt the weight of dozens of eyes turning toward me, some filled with pity, others with curiosity, but I remained perfectly still, my lips curving into the faintest smile that only I could feel. The irony of her words would soon become apparent to everyone in that room. What Margaret didn't know was that my father had visited me 3 months before his sudden heart attack. He had come to my small apartment in the Pearl District, looking older than his years, his usually pristine appearance disheveled from what I later learned was the stress of discovering her affair. The coffee grew cold between us as he revealed everything: her secret meetings with his business partner, the money she had been siphoning from his accounts, the lies she had told about me to justify her cruelty. His hands shook as he pulled out a sealed envelope from his jacket pocket, pressing it into my palm with desperate urgency. "Emma," he whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. "I've been a fool, but I'm going to make this right." The weight of that envelope felt like the weight of redemption itself. The envelope contained more than just his heartfelt apology written in his familiar handwriting. Inside was a key to a safety deposit box at First National Bank, along with detailed instructions about a trust he had secretly established in my name 6 months earlier. The trust contained not just money, but also documentation of Margaret's financial crimes, recorded conversations, and evidence of her extramarital affair that would void their prenuptial agreement. My father had been methodically gathering proof, preparing to divorce her and restore my rightful place in his life. The irony wasn't lost on me as I watched her perform her grief for the crowd, completely unaware that her own words would soon become her downfall. Each document in that trust was a nail in the coffin of her carefully constructed lies. As the service continued, I noticed Margaret's sister Patricia, whispering frantically in her ear, probably reminding her about the will reading scheduled for the next morning. The family lawyer, Mr. Henderson, stood near the back of the room, his expression unreadable as he observed the scene. Margaret's performance was flawless, the devastated widow who had to deal with her husband's disappointing daughter even in death. She dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief, though I noticed no actual tears. The rain outside seemed to intensify, creating rivulets down the windows that looked like the tears she couldn't produce. Little did she know that tomorrow would bring revelations that would shatter her carefully constructed world. The funeral director's gentle voice announced the final hymn, and I prepared myself for the confrontation that was coming. The funeral director announced that the graveside service would be held at Lone Fir Cemetery, where my father would be laid to rest beside my mother. As people began to file out into the gray October afternoon, Margaret approached me with predatory satisfaction gleaming in her eyes. "I hope you've learned to live on your own, Emma," she said, her voice dripping with false concern, "because that's all you'll ever have now." I looked directly into her eyes, no longer the frightened 18-year-old she had tormented, and replied quietly, "We'll see about that tomorrow." The confusion that flickered across her face was almost worth the 8 years of hell she had put me through. As she walked away, her heels clicking on the marble floor. I touched the envelope in my purse one last time. The law office of Henderson and Associates occupied the top floor of a historic building in downtown Portland, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city's skyline. Margaret sat rigidly in the leather chair across from Mr. Henderson's massive oak desk, her manicured fingers drumming impatiently against her designer purse. She had arrived 30 minutes early, dressed in a black Chanel suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, ready to claim her inheritance and finalize my exile from the family fortune. The morning fog was just beginning to lift from the Willamette River, revealing the bridges that connected the east and west sides of the city. I entered the office exactly on time, wearing a simple navy dress that had belonged to my mother, carrying only a small clutch and the envelope my father had given me. The contrast between us couldn't have been more stark. She dressed for victory. I dressed for justice. Mr. Henderson adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and opened the thick file labeled Estate of David William Morrison. Margaret leaned forward expectantly, her red lips curved in a triumphant smile as she prepared to hear the reading of what she believed to be her ticket to a life of unlimited luxury. "Before we begin with the will," the lawyer said carefully, "I need to inform you both that Mr. Morrison established a trust 3 months before his death." The color drained from Margaret's face as I slowly reached into my purse and withdrew the envelope. Her eyes widened in recognition as she saw my father's handwriting on the outside, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely afraid. The silence in the room was deafening as Mr. Henderson examined the documents I handed him. The trust documents revealed the full extent of my father's final gift to me: complete ownership of his 3 restaurants, his investment portfolio worth over $2 million, and the family home where I had spent the first 10 years of my life. But more devastating to Margaret was the evidence my father had compiled: bank statements showing her unauthorized withdrawals, photographs of her with her lover, and recorded phone conversations where she admitted to manipulating my father's medication. Mr. Henderson's voice remained steady and professional as he explained that the prenuptial agreement was null and void due to her fraudulent behavior. Margaret's hands began to shake as she realized that instead of inheriting everything, she would be left with nothing and facing potential criminal charges. The documents spread across the desk like a roadmap of her deception. "This is impossible," Margaret whispered, her voice cracking for the first time since I'd known her. "David would never. He loved me." I finally spoke, my voice calm and clear, as I addressed the woman who had made my teenage years a living nightmare. "He loved the person he thought you were, Margaret, but he discovered who you really are." The recording device in my father's study had captured her cruel words about me, her plans to contest any will that favored me, and her admission that she had married him solely for his money. The room fell silent, except for the sound of her rapid breathing and the distant hum of traffic 20 floors below. Each revelation was like watching a house of cards collapse in slow motion. Margaret's carefully constructed facade began to crumble as Mr. Henderson continued reading the specifics of the trust. My father had not only secured my financial future, but had also included provisions for my college education, which she had convinced him I didn't deserve. The scholarship applications she had hidden, the acceptance letters she had intercepted, the graduation ceremony she had prevented him from attending. All of it was documented in his final letter to me. "Emma," his words read aloud by the lawyer, "I failed you as a father, but I hope this gives you the chance to build the life you deserve." Margaret's breathing became labored as she realized the magnitude of her losses. Not just financial, but the complete destruction of her reputation in Portland's social circles. The truth had finally set me free, but it had imprisoned her in the consequences of her own actions. The meeting concluded with Mr. Henderson informing Margaret that she had 48 hours to vacate the family home, and that the district attorney's office would be contacted regarding the evidence of her financial crimes. As she stumbled from the office, her designer heels clicking erratically on the marble floor, I remained seated, processing the enormity of what had just transpired. The view from the windows showed the city where I had grown up, where I had suffered, and where I would now have the chance to rebuild my life. The rain had stopped, and for the first time in 8 years, the sun was breaking through the clouds, casting golden light across the river and the bridges that would carry me toward my future. Margaret's parting words echoed in my mind. "This isn't over, Emma." But I knew it was. Her chapter in my life had finally ended. 3 weeks later, I stood in the doorway of my childhood home, breathing in the familiar scent of my mother's rose garden that had somehow survived Margaret's reign of terror. The house on Laurelhurst's quiet, tree-lined street looked smaller than I remembered, but every room held memories that Margaret had tried to erase. The hardwood floors still creaked in the same places where I used to tiptoe as a child, trying not to wake my parents during my midnight trips to the kitchen. Margaret had redecorated extensively, replacing my mother's warm, welcoming touches with cold, modern furniture that made the house feel like a museum. But now I had the chance to restore it, to bring back the warmth and love that had once filled these walls. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows felt like a blessing, warming rooms that had been cold for too long. The local newspaper had picked up the story of Margaret's downfall, though Mr. Henderson had managed to keep the most damaging details private. "Local woman faces fraud charges in inheritance scandal," read the headline of the Portland Tribune, accompanied by a photo of Margaret hiding her face behind a scarf as she left the courthouse. The article detailed her arrest for elder financial abuse and fraud, but didn't mention the extent of her cruelty toward me or the years of emotional manipulation. I folded the newspaper and placed it in the drawer of my father's desk, where it would remain as a reminder of how quickly fortunes can change. The phone had been ringing constantly with calls from reporters and curious neighbors, but I had learned to let them go to voicemail. Some stories were too personal to share with strangers who only wanted sensational headlines. My father's restaurants, Morrison's Steakhouse, the River Cafe, and Bella Vista, had continued operating under the management of his trusted staff, but they needed direction and vision for the future. I spent my days learning the business from veteran employees who had worked with my father for decades, people who remembered me as the bright-eyed little girl who used to help fold napkins and arrange flowers. "Your father was so proud of you," Maria, the head chef at Morrison's, told me as we reviewed the menu in her aromatic kitchen. "He used to talk about how smart you were, how you were going to do something special with your life." These conversations helped heal wounds I didn't even know were still bleeding. The kitchen staff became my first real family in years, accepting me not because of my inheritance, but because of who I was. The trust fund had also provided for my education, and I enrolled in Portland State University's business administration program, determined to properly prepare myself for running the family enterprises. My classmates were mostly 18-year-olds fresh from high school, while I was 26 with a lifetime of experience in disappointment and resilience. Professor Janet Mills, who taught my strategic management course, became an unexpected mentor when she learned about my situation. "You have something most business students lack," she told me after class one evening. "You understand that business is about people, not just numbers." Her words gave me confidence as I navigated the complex world of financial statements, employee relations, and customer service. The night classes were challenging, but they represented everything Margaret had tried to deny me: education, opportunity, and hope. The most difficult part of reclaiming my life was dealing with the emotional aftermath of Margaret's years of psychological abuse. Dr. Sarah Chen, a therapist recommended by Mr. Henderson, helped me understand that my father's final actions were his way of trying to make amends for the years he had been blind to Margaret's treatment of me. "Forgiveness isn't about forgetting," she explained during one of our sessions in her cozy office overlooking Pioneer Square. "It's about freeing yourself from the poison of resentment." The work was hard, painful, and sometimes felt impossible. But gradually I began to reclaim parts of myself that I had thought were lost forever. Each session was like peeling away layers of scar tissue, revealing the person I had been before Margaret's cruelty had changed me. As autumn turned to winter, I found myself standing in the same spot where I had watched my father's funeral just months before. But now, I was looking out at the city from the windows of my own office at Morrison's Steakhouse, watching the early December snow dust the streets of downtown Portland. The restaurant was bustling with holiday parties and celebrations, filled with the laughter and warmth that had always been my father's vision. I had kept his favorite table in the corner, where a small plaque now read, "In memory of David Morrison, a man who believed in second chances." The irony wasn't lost on me that Margaret's cruel words at his funeral had become the catalyst for my own second chance at life. Every time I looked at that table, I felt my father's presence, as if he were still there, finally proud of the woman I had become. By spring, the legal proceedings against Margaret had concluded with her pleading guilty to multiple counts of fraud and receiving a 2-year prison sentence. The courtroom had been nearly empty, except for her sister Patricia, Mr. Henderson, and myself, a stark contrast to the crowd that had witnessed her dramatic declaration at my father's funeral. She had aged dramatically in the months since her arrest, her perfectly styled hair now showing gray roots, her expensive clothes replaced with an orange jumpsuit that made her look smaller and more vulnerable than I had ever seen her. When given the chance to make a statement before sentencing, she had looked directly at me and whispered, "I'm sorry, Emma." Whether she meant it or was simply trying to gain sympathy, I would never know. The judge's gavel fell with finality, closing the chapter on years of manipulation and abuse. The transformation of my father's restaurants had become my passion project, and I had spent months working with architects and designers to create spaces that honored his memory while reflecting my own vision for the future. Morrison's Steakhouse remained elegant and traditional, catering to the business crowd and special occasions. The River Cafe was renovated into a casual family restaurant with a children's menu and outdoor seating overlooking the waterfront. Bella Vista became my pride and joy, a farm-to-table restaurant that showcased the incredible produce of the Pacific Northwest, with herbs and vegetables grown in the rooftop garden I had installed. Each restaurant told a different story, but all of them reflected the values my father had taught me: quality, integrity, and treating people with respect. The grand reopening of Bella Vista drew food critics from across the region, and their glowing reviews validated everything I had worked toward. My relationship with my extended family had slowly begun to heal as well. My father's sister, Aunt Claire, had reached out after reading about Margaret's conviction in the newspaper. "I always knew something wasn't right," she admitted during our emotional reunion at her home in Seattle. "But David seemed so happy, and Margaret was so convincing when she said you were rebellious and ungrateful." The family gathering she organized for my 27th birthday was the first time in nearly a decade that I felt truly connected to my father's side of the family. My cousins, who had been kept away from me during Margaret's reign, welcomed me back with open arms and shared stories about my father that I had never heard. The laughter around the dinner table felt like music after years of silence and isolation. The house on Laurelhurst had been completely renovated, with Margaret's cold modern touches replaced by warm colors and comfortable furniture that invited conversation and laughter. I had converted one of the spare bedrooms into a library, filling it with books about business, cooking, and travel, dreams that I could now pursue. My mother's rose garden had been expanded, and now included a small greenhouse where I grew herbs for the restaurants. The kitchen, where Margaret had once forbidden me to cook, became the heart of the home again, filled with the aromas of recipes passed down from my mother and grandmother. Friends from the restaurant industry often gathered there for impromptu dinner parties, bringing life and joy back to rooms that had been silent for too long. As I stood in the cemetery on the first anniversary of my father's death, I realized that Margaret's cruel words had indeed come true, but not in the way she had intended. The ungrateful daughter she had tried to destroy had gained everything that truly mattered: self-respect, financial security, meaningful work, and the love of people who knew my true worth. The white lilies I placed on my father's grave were grown in my own garden, and the tears I shed were tears of gratitude rather than grief. "Thank you, Dad," I whispered to the wind that rustled through the maple trees, "for giving me a second chance, and for showing me that sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the most unexpected packages. The inscription on his headstone read simply, "Beloved Father, he never gave up on love." The Portland Business Journal had featured my story in their Rising Stars section, highlighting how I had transformed a family tragedy into a business success story. The article mentioned that all 3 restaurants were thriving, that I had created over 50 new jobs, and that I was planning to open a culinary school to teach young people the restaurant business. But what the article couldn't capture was the deeper transformation, how a woman who had been told she was worth nothing had discovered that she was worth everything. As I drove home through the familiar streets of Portland, past the bridges that connected different parts of the city, I realized that I had become my own bridge between the pain of the past and the promise of the future. Margaret's words at the funeral had been meant to destroy me, but instead, they had become the foundation upon which I built my new life.